Welcome back, everybody, to the Big Tire Garage and another one of our question and answer sessions from here inside the shop. Once again, just to refresh your memory, all you have to do is ask a question on any of my YouTube videos. I just go through and randomly pick the questions, throw them on a Word document, and then I print them out right before I come out here and sit down and read them off. So I don't even know what questions are on this piece of paper until it's time to shoot. So, and if I choose your question, if you hear it right on here, make sure to shoot me an email, bigtiregarage@gmail.com, and I'll send you out a sticker pack in the mail. Good news is we just added patches to the Shopify store. Everyone was asking for patches, so I went ahead and I had another logo knocked out by a guy who reached out to me on Instagram, Logo Cabin. So if you need some logos done, he did a banger job on it. I think it looks really cool. I like the OG logo, but I thought it would be kind of fun just to do the patch, a different sort of like retro Big Tire Garage logo. So we did that. Also, so if you're looking to buy stickers or buy a patch, you can go on, I'll put a link in the description below to the Shopify store. Also, if a bunch of people are asking about these mugs, these Big Tire Garage mugs. So these are fulfilled off-site. I use, it used to be called Teespring. Now it's just called Spring, I guess. I'll put a link in the description below. I like the mugs, really good quality. Also have some shirts on there, but we are working on some limited edition drop shirts that we're gonna fulfill here in the shop. And we'll be just basically printing out like 100 shirts or 200 shirts. We're just gonna do some limited edition stuff. And so those are coming out. I got some designs being worked on by my buddy over at Sketch My Ride. Anyway, all that stuff that took care of all the business side of these things. And for those of you that bought stickers, I really appreciate it. You know what I mean? Like I said before, I'm not trying to be a merch guy, but a bunch of people asked about the stickers, and it's just easier for me just to go ahead and sell them instead of trying to figure out how to get them out. And so we fired up the Shopify store. Every morning I just come in, stuff some envelopes, and mail it out. So thank you for everyone who's bought a sticker. I appreciate that. Keeps me full of bourbon, which I like. All right, I guess also food too. Here we are. So 3 questions, and then we're gonna do a where is it now, like we talked about before. First question comes from Vincent Carrier 183. What importance do you give to anti-squat and anti-dive values in a trailered rock crawler rig? So first let's talk about what he's talking about. Anti-squat, anti-dive, he's referring to basically link geometry, either 4-link, 3-link, any type of link suspension. Anti-dive is any of the basically action or reaction that happens to the front suspension on hard braking, or I guess just any braking really, whenever the weight transfer moves to the front of the vehicle. Anti-squat always refers to the back of the vehicle or the rear suspension. So to get the first one out of the way, anti-dive. How much time do I spend looking at anti-dive? Very little. And the reason why is, you know, when you're talking about hardcore rock crawling or off-roading in general, you're really not concerned about the hard braking. Maybe in an off-road race car, we might spend some time looking at anti-dive, but there's so many factors that go into that in an off-road car that we can compensate for that anti-dive with other technology now. So you can use like live valving in your front shocks that can actually compensate for that anti-dive. Yes, I spend a little bit of time looking at that, but there's also a dirty little secret that no one likes to talk about when it comes to suspension design on an off-road rig, and we're gonna get to that later. So, first of all, anti-squat. So anti-squat is basically the reaction that the suspension has when the vehicle starts to move forward. So I'm sure we all remember from like high school science or physics class, you've heard the saying, you know, every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. Well, that's what happens to a vehicle. When you hit the gas and the vehicle moves forward, well, something else happens because that's an action. There is a reaction. And that reaction is squat or anti-squat. So when we're talking about anti-squat, what we're talking about is a number at 100%, more than 100%, or less than 100%. And basically what it means is when you hit the gas, the vehicle tries to travel in a forward motion. You want basically all the power of that engine and transmission, transfer case, gearing, everything. You want all that power transmitted from the tires on the ground directly into the suspension components, not the springs or the shocks. If you have a vehicle that has 100% anti-squat in the rear suspension geometry, what that means is that when you hit the gas and the vehicle moves forward, all of that energy that's built up in those tires and wheels and the vehicle trying to move forward, it's basically being transferred into the links, and it's not affecting the shocks or the springs at all. Good way to think about it is this. If you've ever had a leaf-sprung vehicle and you fight axle wrap, axle wrap is the exact same thing that happens to the entire vehicle. So imagine when you have axle wrap, when you load up the suspension, the leaf spring, what happens to the pinion is the pinion wants to twist up, and you're fighting that by adding other things like anti-wrap bars and stuff. Well, in a link suspension, you don't have pinion twist because it can't. It's physically mounted solid. So what happens is instead, is all that energy is essentially transmitted into the entire vehicle. So the vehicle is trying to twist around its center of gravity, around its axis, which it cannot do because it weighs a lot. There's a lot of other forces at play: gravity, traction of the tires, weight, all that kind of stuff. If you don't believe me, jump on your dirt bike, stand over it, dump the clutch in first gear, and what does the dirt bike do? It basically somersaults over itself out from underneath you. That's exactly what your car is trying to do every time you pull away from a stop. So, how important is that number? Well, it kind of depends a lot on what you're trying to do with the vehicle. So, let's steal a little bit of technology from the drag racing world. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it will make sense. In a drag car, you actually want a high anti-squat number. So if we look at 100%, if you can just visualize that in your mind, all that energy is being transmitted into the suspension links, and therefore the vehicle is essentially accelerating what we would call flat. Now there's still some other things that happen because there's weight transfer and there's traction, there's movement, but essentially that's what's happening, is the vehicle is pulling ahead perfectly flat. If we have a high anti-squat number, what's actually happening is a lot of the load is being transmitted into the shocks and springs. In a drag car, that is what you want because you're using that technology, the shocks and the springs and the valving in the shocks and the springs that you choose, you're using that to help plant the tires. So if you were to think about it, you're basically pushing the vehicle kind of up in the air, and that's actually helping to transfer some weight. And it's very hard to understand because when you see a drag car leave the line, it kind of goes down and forward. And so it's not, yes, it's going down in the back, but it has a high amount of anti-squat. What's happening is just basically power to weight transfer, all that kind of stuff is happening to that car. So a drag car will have usually a little bit higher than 100% anti-squat because that allows the vehicle to get a little bit more traction on the tires. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. It really does. In a off-road race car, like a rally car, or let's say a desert racing vehicle, you want a very low anti-squat number. So let's say 30 to 40%. Because what that's going to do is when you're on the gas, that is going to basically pull the rear end down every time you're on the gas. And what that does, it actually helps the front tires get a little bit lighter. Think of a motorcycle once again, when you're in like a desert and you're on like a rough road, or even on any dirt road, you're in that washboard stuff. The way to smooth that out is you basically push your weight back on the bike, and that kind of lightens up that front tire. So in an off-road car, when I'm building it, usually what I'm trying to do is I'm kind of looking at where I'm going to wheel it. I'll go for like that low anti-squat number. I don't really try to get as low as 30 to 40%. I might try to drop down to 50% if I'm maybe going to do a bunch of West Coast stuff. Hill climbing, hill killing stuff, I might go a little bit over 100%, maybe 120, because I want that traction on the rear tires. But here is actually a better way to think about designing a suspension. First, well, let's take a couple steps back. In road race cars, they go for 100% anti-squat and 100% anti-dive usually because they want predictability in that chassis. So they don't want the vehicle to squat down, they don't want the vehicle to lift up, they don't want the vehicle to squat down when they hit the brakes, or they don't want the vehicle to lift up when they hit the gas. That's just, they want predictability. They want the vehicle to stay flat in the corners, flat in the turns. And that's why that number really is stolen from the road race technology world and drag racing as well. In the off-road world, what I look at instead is don't focus so much on one specific anti-squat number. Instead, when you build your suspension, make sure that your upper link mounts at the chassis, because it's the easiest place to do it, have a couple different mounting holes. I like to shoot for 3. If you look at like some really good, well-designed, basically I would call it out of the box, but it's like you got to weld it together yourself kind of suspension systems that fit vehicles like Jeeps and stuff like that. They will normally have multiple mounting points for those upper links. And that allows you to fine tune that anti-squat number. That also allows you to spend time, if you want to, out on the trail, depending on where you wheel, whether it's West Coast, East Coast, South, North, wherever you go. You can play around it. You can see what feels best for you. So you can adjust those links up or adjust those links down. You don't have to move them a lot, only about an inch. And it will change how that rear suspension reacts. And then you can just sort of choose what works best for your driving style, your wheeling style, all that kind of stuff. So instead of focusing specifically on trying to get an anti-squat number that you think is going to work for you, it's better just to build the suspension with a little bit of adjustability in it, so then you can fine tune it. You'll see drag cars have tons of adjustability in their link bars, and that's because they have a lot of things that they need to worry about. Temperature, the actual atmosphere that they're in, there are 1,000 things come into play where they are, and they're trying to make maximum traction. So you'll see them play around with those link bars. So being able to adjust yours into a couple different locations, that's just good practice for you. But here's the dirty little secret that nobody talks about when it comes to off-road suspension design. So everything when it comes to suspension design, suspension technology, everything that we choose, engineering, all that kind of stuff, we usually steal it from the road race world or automotive. We can go right back to basically factory automotive engineering setups. So that there's engineers out there designing suspension for cars every single day of the week. But once again, let's think back to math class, like middle school, right? Middle school. So you used to get math problems that would say 5x plus 2 equals y. And then the teacher would say, solve for x if y equals 7. And you could do that math because you only had one variable in the equation. The same thing holds true to any type of engineering or science or anything that you're trying to figure out, is you need to minimize the variables in the situation. And it's easy to do all the math. It's easy to figure everything out. There's a great online 4-link calculator. It's from, I always say Triage, but I think I did it wrong. I think it's Triangle. I don't know. I'll put a link to it below. I get it off the Crawl magazine website, is where I get mine from. And it looks like this. And you can adjust a bunch of values, and it'll compute what anti-squat numbers you're going to have and all that kind of jazz, move your links up and down and all that kind of stuff. But all of that math is basically set up for a vehicle that's sitting on a flat road, because there are no other variables. It's just flat road. Now take that vehicle, put it at a 30-degree angle. Now take that vehicle, put it at a 30-degree angle, take the right front tire, put it 30 inches taller than the left front tire, because the left front tire is in a hole and the right front tire is on a ledge, and guess what? You can't solve for that. You've added too many variables to the equation. You're no longer just finding x because you know what y is. You're trying to solve for x and y and 5 and 2 and probably 15 other letters that you've thrown in that math equation. It can't be done. I shouldn't say that. It can be done, but what you would have to do is you would have to go in and look at the vehicle at that angle on the hill, figure out where the new center of gravity is, figure out where your new instant center is because your tires have moved and all the links have changed, figure out where you have to solve for all the things and then get back and then look at what the rear suspension is doing, and then you could solve the actual anti-squat number. It's very, very difficult to get that number perfect for every type of off-roading because off-roading changes. So the best solution, as I've said before, is don't just try to get one anti-squat number. Get a suspension or build a suspension with adjustability in it. That way you can fine-tune it for how you wheel, and it allows you to basically get it set up perfectly for your wheeling and driving style. That's how much attention I pay to anti-squat and anti-dive. Also, here's another dirty little secret. On a tube buggy, sky's the limit. I can mount the links to the roof, I can mount the links to the floor, I can mount the links anywhere I want. On a vehicle like a Jeep, your hands are kind of tied. There's a floor in the way. You may sit down at that 4-link calculator and find the ideal suspension setup that you want, and then you go to put it in the car and you find out that you can't put the link there because there's no frame rail there, or the gas tank's in the way, or the body's in the way. Now the easy solution there is just cut all that junk out, but not everyone can do that. So as I said before, instead of trying to find that perfect anti-squat number, make your suspension adjustable and tunable, and that way you'll be a lot happier in the long run. So there you go. Hopefully I answered your question. I know I answered your question. Hopefully you like the answer. All right, guys, next question. Next question is Mikey Oz's 72. I don't see you do very much Toyota stuff. Do you have plans or desire to build one in the future? Would love to see you build a 4x4 Hilux or a first-gen 4Runner. Keep up the great content. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I've built many Toyotas. I love Toyotas. The issue that I have with Toyotas is where I live. The woods aren't friendly to Toyotas. Also, the classic Toyota build with the 22RE and 1700 transfer cases bolted together to get all those gear ratios that you can play around with. When it comes to wheeling in the South, that's not really what you need. You just need a little bit of horsepower, some wheel speed, and hope you come out the top. So the Toyotas are great. They're super cool. Like I said, I've built a lot of them. I've built early Toyotas where I've done solid axle swaps. I've done a couple later on Toyotas where I did a couple Tacomas where I did a solid axle swap. I most recently built the Adventure Toyota, which I didn't think I'd love it as much as I do, but I absolutely love that truck. My little single cab, I guess it's a short bed Toyota that I've now got a V8 underneath the hood, and I'm just working on getting that thing running and driving again. I absolutely love that truck. Now it's still IFS. No, I've built many Toyotas and I love them and I think they're great. Dream Toyota build for me, in all honesty, it would be a Toyota, either a Chinook, which is like the super small camper, or the Toyota Dolphin, which is like the little bit bigger, almost like a Class C truck. I think it'd be cool to do like an overlanding vehicle like that, but still have like all the super creature comforts. Like I'm talking like a real bed, maybe an outdoor kitchen, and a place to sit and watch TV. And it's not going to be a hardcore rock crawler, but it's going to be a great place to sleep for the night. Do a Cummins R2.8, maybe a Tremec 4050, solid axle swap that, put some hardcore rock crawlery junk underneath it to make it awesome, but still have that full-blown camper on the back. I think that would be super, super cool. That would be my dream Toyota build. So yeah, I build a lot of Toyotas. I think they're great. And I even own some, and I'm glad that they're in my stable of vehicles. I think I'm drawn to Jeeps a lot just because that was my first full drive vehicle was a Jeep, and I'm just a Jeep guy at heart. So, but I don't discriminate. I like all vehicles. Next question is from Jeffco9203. I love thinking about how I would build different off-road vehicles for different needs, but the reality is most of us only have one vehicle to do everything. My question for you is, if you could only have one vehicle to do everything, what would it be? Was that the idea of the Crawlarado, and did the Crawlarado live up to your expectations? That is a really good question. I love that because yes, I know I am incredibly fortunate to not only have a job where I just get to build cool junk all day, every day, but I also know that I'm also fortunate in the fact that I have a lot of off-road cars, and I get to keep almost all the ones that I built. I get to keep them. And so I basically have as many off-road cars at this point as I have pairs of pants. And so I can just pick what I want to drive depending on where I'm going to go. But to answer your actual question, which is, if I could just choose one, which would it be, and is that what the Crawlarado was going to be? My initial response to that before I took the Crawlarado out would have been no. The Crawlarado is just being built for ultimate adventure, and that's what it is. Now that I've used the Crawlarado a couple times, the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. I think the Crawlarado would be, for myself, the perfect vehicle if I only had one, and I'll explain why. So, for those of you that don't know, I built the Crawlarado as part of a special 4x4 garage series for Motor Trend, where we were building a vehicle to take on ultimate adventure. I started with basically just a cab. I threw a bunch of tube on the floor and built my own frame. I did a 3-link in the front with coil springs. I did leaf springs in the back. just basically dropped the cab of a Crawlarado, extended cab, Crawlarado. I think it's first gen Crawlarado, I think is how they refer to it. I'm not a Crawlarado guy, but I'm pretty sure it's first gen. Put some fiberglass fenders on it, 1 tons, 38s, put a storage boxes on the back, and then a rooftop tent mounted at cab height. My idea behind that was I was just trying to build a cool truck for Real Truck, who was the sponsor that year of Ultimate Adventure, because I build their trucks for them a lot of the times. And then aside from that, the idea was pretty simple. It was just build a cool truck. The reality is, once I took that thing out and wheeled it, drove it down the highway, used it a bunch, yes, I think it's the perfect vehicle. If I had to go through all of my project vehicles and not have like the sentimental attachment to them like I do, like got a lot of sentimental attachment to Lockjaw because, you know, I built that on Extreme, and it's a memory for me. That's one that I got to keep because I built it on that TV show. And basically the old executive producer made sure that I got that truck before the company changed hands. So that's special to me. The shop truck, the YJ, that's special to me because that's the Big Tire Garage shop truck. There's a lot of emotions attached to those vehicles. But if I removed all the emotions out of it and I just lined up all my trucks and went down the line and said, which one, in my opinion, is like the Swiss Army knife of trucks for what I would want to do, yeah, I think the Crawlarado would definitely be it. And that is because it does everything well. It drives down the road great. You can drive down the road with one finger on the steering wheel. It just cruises down the road. Believe it or not, during Ultimate Adventure, I was getting almost 19 miles per gallon in that truck driving down the road. It blew my mind. We stopped for fuel. I filled up with fuel and I was like, how far did we drive? And they're like 350 miles. I'm like, no, there's no way. I did some quick math and I was getting 19.5 miles per gallon in that truck. Blew my mind. Throw down hardcore crawler, yes, all day long. I would change the tires on it. I'm not a big fan of those 38s. I would ditch those for like some 40-inch tires, maybe some crawlers, or some Nittos. Oh, that truck would be perfect at that point. Maybe I'll still do that. And I do have some refinements I still want to do to it. It's still kind of like full-blown cab truck inside. It's not really user-friendly. Like there's no heat, no AC, no gauges, no nothing. So I would change that. I'd finish out the inside really nice. I'm talking to a couple people about coming up with some sort of like pull-out kitchen that mounts behind the driver's seat so we can have like when you've stopped to camp, because that's the other thing the truck does really well. It's got those storage boxes in the back to carry, if it was just a day of wheeling, you could just throw a bunch of parts in there. That Rugged Ridge rooftop tent fits on the back so small and compact that it would never get in the way on the trails, and if it did, it's an $800 tent. If something happened to it, it wouldn't break your heart. It's not like you got like a $5,000 tent on the back of the truck, if you know what I'm saying. Like, yeah, it would suck if something happened to the tent, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And then it's great for overlanding, right? If you wanted to just overland in it, you can do that. But it's still hardcore buggy underneath. It really, really is. It's a great truck. Oh, it's powered by 5.3, 4L60, Magnum, and then a 205. So it's got all the good junk in it, you know, it's got all the stuff you want. So at the end of the day, yeah, I think if I had to line everything up and pick one vehicle, that would be it, because I think that it would serve the purpose. You could, if you wanted to if you were going full on hardcore crawling and you knew and you weren't going to camp, it's 4 bolts and the tent's off the back, and then you just got the flatbed on the back. If you want to lose the boxes, just to lose some weight, 4 more bolts and the boxes are gone, and then you just have a legitimate flatbed. You know, it's just a really, really, I didn't go into it with that plan, but I kind of lucked out. That's kind of what happened. So there you go, guys. Those are your 3 questions for the week. Thank you so much for asking them. If you heard me ask your question, make sure, send me your mailing address to bigtiregarage@gmail.com, and I will get a sticker pack sent out to you in the mail. Now, the where is it now today is going to be the S10 Truggy. So a lot of people asked about this truck. For those of you that don't know, the S10 Truggy is, it had a lot of different names. It was called the S10 Truggy, it was called the Green Envy, we called it the Green Machine, it was called the Toxic Truggy. It had many different names on my old TV show. The idea behind that truck was, I built that truck when that whole rock bouncer thing was just kind of taking off, so it was fairly new. I think I built it like 06, 07. Full disclosure, I absolutely copied Adam Woodley's truck from Wide Open Designs. I don't even know if he was Wide Open Designs back then, to be honest. It was just, Adam Woodley was just the guy. And he built this truck called Pimpin' Ain't Easy, and it was in an issue of Crawl magazine. I read it and I'm like, that's a cool looking truck. And I met Adam at a 4-wheel parts open house, and I said, just an FYI, I'm totally copying that truck. And he was like, whatever, man, that works for me as long as it's cool. So we mentioned him on the show. We talked about how this truck, you know, inspired by Pimpin' Ain't Easy. We showed the book, showed the magazine, showed everything on the show. Even had Adam come in and do a little bit of work on the show, which was super cool. So the truck was great. It was 502, 4L80, a 203, 205 combo, because the Magnum box wasn't out then. Rockwell's front and rear, 46-inch Baja claws, 4-wheel steer, cool lime green paint, but it was big. It was big. I think the wheelbase on that truck was like, it may have been knocking on the door at 12 feet. It was long. It was a big old truck. It really was. By the time you packaged everything in there, it was insane. It was heavy. A lot of tube work on it. I mean, it looked cool. It did its job. It looked cool, made good TV. Where is that truck now? I know exactly where it is now, but it's in like 10 different places. So this is what happened. We wheeled the truck a bunch of different times. I didn't own the truck. The truck was owned by the production company. The production company, you know, you could only keep vehicles for so long. That was not their job. They didn't want to keep those vehicles. We had an agreement with a friend of mine. He would buy those vehicles on the understanding that we didn't want to see them just bought and flipped type of thing. And by the time he got a hold of that truck, it had been wheeled a couple times. And it ate a few trees, and the cab kind of looked like a beer can. It was pretty crushed and pretty twisted, and it was pretty bad. So when he got a hold of the truck, he stripped it down, pulled the cab off. He actually sold the chassis to somebody else, and then he built a 4-seat tube buggy around the entire drivetrain. So the 502, the 4L80, the 2 transfer cases, the Rockwells, the tires, everything. All of the drivetrain ended up in a tube buggy, which what he did, which I thought was pretty cool, he actually powder coated the tube buggy, the same silver that we had powder coated the chassis, and then he painted all the body panels for the tube buggy the lime green that we'd painted the truck. So it kind of still had the look and feel of the Truggy when we built it. The cab was garbage by the time he got a hold of it. It was destroyed. Every panel was dented, every panel was crushed. There really wasn't much cab. And that's what happens to cab trucks in the South. Like, the reality is, if you wheel your rig a lot around here, trees eat it up. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't like to take lockjaw out on this side of the country. I'll wheel it West Coast all day long. I'll take it out in Sand Hollow. I'll take it out in Moab. I'll take it out, no, maybe not Colorado, but I take it out to Hammers, all that stuff, because you really do have a lot of options, and there's no trees trying to eat up your truck or the body. Around here, if you wheel it and you really wheel it, it's going to destroy the body. That's just part of the game. So the body went away. He actually ended up selling the chassis. Someone took another S10, dropped it on the chassis, and built a completely different rock bouncery kind of looking thing. So the S10 Truggy, it's not all together, but it still lived on because that 4-seat buggy ended up, someone owns it locally. And I saw it for a few years popping up at a few off-road parks here and there. And so it's still doing its job. The parts always just move on. I make the joke all the time. I say off-road cars, they're like Mexican food. If you go to a Mexican restaurant, and trust me, I love Mexican food. Oh, my tummy shows it. But if you're honest with yourself, 90% of that menu is just seasoned meat wrapped up in a tortilla. Well, if you're honest with yourself, every off-road car is just an engine, transmission, transfer case, couple axles, tires, and wheels with just a different wrapper around the outside. Whether that's a Ultra 4 wrapper, or a Rock Bouncer wrapper, or a Jeep wrapper, or a Bronco wrapper, or a Toyota wrapper, at the end of the day, it usually ends up being almost the same package. It usually ends up being LS, something transmission, couple transfer cases or single transfer case, and a couple of 1-ton axles, and then just wrapped up a different way. So when a vehicle comes apart and gets wrapped up into a different burrito, maybe this time instead of being a burrito, maybe this time it's a chimichanga. I'm fine with that. I think that's cool, as long as the parts live on and keep crawling over rocks. All right, guys, Thank you so much for all of your questions. I'm loving these Q&A sessions. Make sure you get on the video, ask the question, any question you want, because I just pull them off there randomly and answer them here for you guys. We'll talk to you soon. We'll see you next time from inside the Big Tire Garage.